I'm going to talk about web components and building a web app using a starter kit. So, who am I? Daniel Persson, known as Kalaspuppar pretty much everywhere except for YouTube for some reason. And I work at Textalk, and they are trying to make the world a more accessible place. So everything in the world should be more accessible to everyone. And I also have some consultancy on the side. So the agenda today is talk a little bit about HTML, because that's a prerequisite. A little bit about web components, Polymer, and some projects. So HTML then. What is HTML? Well, it's awesome. It has no programming. It has no errors, no compilation, and it can run pretty much anywhere, easy syntax, and it has full support for accessibility. It's platform independent, have a lot of multimedia support, and has been around for 25 years. Well tested. So it started in 1991 by Tim Berners-Lee, and by this time you had a document format, so you could use titles and headers and so on. And I was actually building some web pages in this time, and there's a glaring sort of area here with some technology missing. Well, it's animations. But this tag was later removed because it wasn't that good. And then we come to 1995, where we have added some more structure to the document. We have Polymer Elements, so we can send data back to the server, and tables, and a lot of good stuff. And by 1997, the end of 1997, we have pretty much everything that we use today in HTML. We have scripts for JavaScripts, we have fonts, we have styling, and so on. So it was pretty much done. And 99, we got some more fields. Some are used today, but some are not that relevant. And then it took a huge amount of time until we saw any development in HTML. We had a lot of CSS upgrades, and a lot of JavaScript was worked on, but not so much on HTML standards. And then we got HTML5, where we could structure our document with articles and asides and a lot of good things up here. And we also got some canvas so we can draw things and use SVGs. And we had a lot of media elements to actually decide that we can't send this huge video to a little mobile phone in Colombia or something. So we could change what we actually sent over the network with these media elements, which is very strong addition to this format. So are we done then? Well, then we come to web components, which is the next new thing. And they are custom elements, so they extend HTML. You get new tags and new functionality into the HTML language. In there we have HTML templates, which are small parts that you can stamp out and reuse in your document. We have imports, so we can composition and have a dependency in between different HTML web components. And we have the shadow DOM to encapsulate all the functionality. So the CSS and the script and the templates are bundled in one piece. So we can reuse them online without actually destroying anything around them or changing any behavior or look and feel. So some specifications. HTML templates are pretty much done. It was completed in 2014 and is implemented. Then we have Shadow DOM and custom elements, which are heavily worked on at the moment, but those are still working drafts, but there's a lot of work on them at the moment. And HTML imports, well, there's a lot of disagreements how they should be done, so it's not that high of a priority at the moment. So, browser support. Templates, as I said, is pretty much in any browser. The import is stable in Chrome and Opera, and polyfilled in the rest. Custom elements, stable Chrome Opera, polyfill in the rest. Firefox have a development branch where everything is implemented, but it's not pushed to production at the moment. And lastly, Shadow DOM is stable in Safari, development in Firefox, and still considered by Edge. And I think that Edge will probably work on Shadow DOM next, because that's the most important part of web components. So, this slide. It's actually a requirement when you're talking about web components, because this is a movement that I started, that they actually were thinking about how are we deploying web applications today. Yes, we bundle a lot of JavaScript and send them over the network to the user, and then we bootstrap them up, and well, it can take a lot of time. So why not move most of the functionality back to the browsers? So you send a little less and make the browsers do more of the work for actually showing the information. So, Polymer. Polymer is, we can start with the Polymer CLI. It's a tool that you can use to build your Polymer project. You can lint it, and you have test with Selenium built in. And you can also serve it, so you run it and you get both display of your components and also your application inside of this with documentation. And you have inits, so you can bootstrap different parts of this. And when you build your application, you get two parts. You get one bundled version and one unbundled version. And the bundled version is built up that you have one larger part that is the framework that you send over the network, and then you have different fragments that build on different pages for the rest of the application. But the unbundled version is every web components for themselves, and that is used more when you can push to the web browser, and then you can have a little bit more of a caching on the other side. So this is my component, the value pair component. It's very impressive. It shows a title, and it shows some value for that title or label. And it has localization support, so I will add a language to it, label, and so on. And this demo you have here, that you get for free with Polymer. So you get a demo page that you can show off your element and show different sides of it and how it works. And you also get an API reference for free. Just add some extra comments to your code, and you have this API reference for free, which is very nifty. So a component structure. We start off by importing every dependency we have in our component. I have just one at the moment. Then we create a DOM module, and this is mostly used for the build process. So you can see what part of the script and the component is connected to each other, so you can actually build them back together again, because the build tool will separate the styling, the script, and the HTML, and compile them separately, and then bring them back together. So this connection is very important for that process. And then inside of our templates, we have the custom styling that we show how we should show this component. And we can also include some common styles that we have defined somewhere else in another component. So the script structure for 1.8 or 1.ish is also, as I said before, has this is connection to the DOM module above, and then you have some properties. You could have strings, for instance, with this short notation, and then you can have a little bit more of a verbose notation, where you have the type, the default value, if this should notify other components that this binding has changed, or if it should reflect back out of the component to the attribute of the component, so you can have a two-way binding. And listeners as observers is another concept that you have in your script structure. You can add listeners, which listens for different events and runs different functions. And this observer is very interesting because here you have a pattern where you say, this function, value changed, should be run if variable or the title in the item or anything in the collection is changed. Then that function will run, which is very powerful. So this is the way we use it. Sharp brackets for single binding and curly brackets for double bound values. Not much to say there. And here we have the new script structure. And this is because the web component standard is actually becoming more whole and more set and more implemented. So this builds on the HTML element, which is the web component standard. So the Polymer element will extend that HTML element, and all these callbacks, connected callbacks, disconnected callback, attribute changed callback, and so on, those are in the spec of the HTML element or the web component. So what does Polymer add then? Well, it adds this configuration block where you can give back your properties, observers and listeners and so on. And that's extra functionality that you had to implement yourself if you write a vanilla web component. But Polymer is actually, the mantra is actually to remove functionality from the Polymer framework. As the web components get more prevalent and have more functionality in them, then Polymer should shrink back and take a less of a part of the work, and you should do more in a standard way. So, some elements then. Google has built Polymer and has a lot of elements that you can use. You have the app elements. These are for building applications. So you have routing, you have localization, and so on there. Then you have the iron elements, more of a functionality base. There you have iron Ajax for fetching things from network, for instance. You have the paper elements, and these are materially designed and also often just extends the normal HTML element. So you can have paper input, for instance. That's an input field with material design. The Google Web Components, there's all the Google APIs, so you have maps and so on. And the gold elements is a very small package where you have the e-commerce part, and those are mostly CV and credit card fields, validation. Neon elements, animations and special effects, so visual stuff. And platinum element, you have offline pushing, push notifications and caching and so on. But on this side, we also have the custom elements. So the community has actually created more than 2,500 repositories, and there's pretty much, I think, more than 1,000 at least authors that have built Ultimate. So the community is vibrant as well. And we built our application using the common starter kit. It has responsive design built in, modular routing, localization, and also web offline caching using a web worker, so you can actually load your site, display everything from cache, and then in the background fetch the new data. And everything in this starter kit is component-based. So, projects, our little project. This is what we built using Polymer. And it's a web audio production environment. So this tooling is used by newspapers and other producers that creates a lot of audio content for their listeners or subscribers. And we built this tool together with the Department for Accessible Media here in Sweden. So it actually built together with them and used by a lot of newspapers. Yeah. So what did we learn during this? Well, Polymer is quite good to prototype your project. In my case, when we started to build this project, I learned about how the design should look and some functionality that we needed in the project. And using Polymer and some small JavaScript server, I was able in a few days to create a prototype that pretty much did what it should do and looked somewhat good. I'm no designer, I'm a back-end developer, so yeah. But code wins arguments, so we actually went forward to build this. Another thing that I actually learned during the Polymer Summit is that the properties should go down and events should go up. And this means that you should give the component everything it needs to work, and it should populate events out of it to say that something has changed. So this way of working with doubly bound values is quite hazardous and could be very hard to debug, and I learned that the hard way. And also we used some, and in the beginning very many, third-party components, and some of them are more production ready than others, and the community is very responsive, so you could actually get a lot of pull requests through and so on, but maybe you should be a bit restrictive to take in too much of the third-party components. Another thing that I realized quite late is that the routing in Polymer, the standard routing is quite simple, so you should actually keep all your routing information as shallow as possible, because if you go with deep structures in one component, you could have a lot of problems to figure out which part should go where. But if every component is responsible for every part of the routing, it becomes very much easier. And you never know what components you need, so this value pair component I showed earlier was heavily used during production and was later removed because we didn't have any place we wanted to show data with a label. And last but not least, separate responsibilities. Every component should do one thing and do it well, and if you give it data, it should work on that data and nothing else. So if you have one large component that has every piece of data and you try to work with that kind of a structure, then you have a lot of problems. So, is anybody else using Polymer? Yeah, there's a few big and huge companies using Polymer. Of course, Google built Polymer, so they are using it quite heavily. I think Google Gaming is using Polymer today, and YouTube has a rework it should release soon, I believe, because I've seen the preview of it. Battlefield 1, that homepage is built in Polymer. Zeppelin, a design tool, is built in Polymer. And during the Polymer Summit, I heard a really interesting story from USA Today. They actually had a small little project they wanted to build, the Olympics, 2 months away. So they hired a lot of people from different colleges all around and were actually able to create a site in 2 months that ran the Olympics, added components during the Olympics to show more stats and so on. So they were quite happy about that. So let's do it again. So they did the same thing for the USA election, and that site was also quite nice to look at. So yeah, that's who's using it today. And if you want to try it out, you can go to webcomponents.org and get more information about web components and the vanilla web components. Polymer project has all information about Polymer. And last but not least, Custom Elements has all the elements from the community. So, any questions?